Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of season 4 of the Brown Girls Guide podcast. Today, we are really pleased to have a guest with us on this episode. But before we introduce them, Kelly, hi, how are you? What's happening? What are you drinking?
Hi, good evening. I am excited for today's guest, but as you said before we get into that, I am well, thank you. It's been a long day, but well otherwise, and currently drinking good old H2O. Did not pour myself a drink. I wonder why we stopped drinking on this podcast. Would it come in handy right now after a long day? But you know what? It's fine. H2O is also good for you. How are you, Amber? Are you drinking anything?
I'm good, thank you. I'm also letting the team down. I'm having water again. I feel like last episode I was drinking water as well. But I just don't have any wine in the house. And we need to get it together. Next episode, we have to have at least a beverage that's not water.
Okay, how are we ever going to get a wine sponsor if we're not actually drinking any wine?
Exactly. We started off so strong wine. We had gins. We had a variety of things. We had ciders we were drinking. Now it's just H2O. We need to get it together.
Yes.
So next time, we will have a beverage. But now that we've got all our pleasantries out of the way, I am pleased to introduce our guest, Liberty. Liberty, it's lovely to meet you. Please, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Certainly, Kelly and Amber. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Thank you for joining us.
And it's a pleasure. So I think for me, let me start by introducing myself. Name is Liberty Matthyse. My gender pronouns are she, her, hers, as well as they, them, theirs. I'm currently the Director of GenderDynamix. That's the oldest registered trans gender-specific human rights organization on the African continent. And of course, we do social justice and gender justice work in the context of health, law reform, and of course, education. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Your work sounds fascinating and very interesting. So just thank you for that. And so today's episode is all about the LGBTQIA plus community. And as two heterosexual women, we don't have a lot of insight into this community. The only insight we really have is our friends and family, but we love to always learn more and know more and just how to better support our friends and family, to be honest. So could you please tell us what you think are the unseen contributions that this community makes in our society?
Trans and gender diverse and broadly speaking LGBTIQ plus people have a particular resilience that I think that many people outside of the community don't embody. And that, of course, sets the community aside for how we survive everyday compounded struggles. And particularly as transgender women of color that come from rural contexts and, of course, usually under-resourced contexts. I'm one of those women, and I think that I can testify as to how difficult it is to show up, to survive, and of course, try and thrive in a society that is so anti-trans, anti-woman, anti-people who do not fit the status quo within society. And so I think for me, the unseen victories within our communities that we often take for granted is really that built-in resilience that we hold in persevering. But of course, everything has its limits. Resilience too has its limits. Yeah. And we question, why is it necessary for us to have this extraordinary resilience in society just to survive? I think LGBTIQ plus people are inherently creative and innovative. I think that forms part of our survival strategies in life. And so that kind of serves us well when we do get to a point of effectively surviving and then being able to use our talents and our skills to contribute to building society as leaders, as innovators, and of course, as creators of change. And here we know we are constantly pushing boundaries just through the work that we do as queer activists, LGBTIQ plus activists, pushing the boundaries around gender, expression, pushing the boundary for expanded understandings of gender justice that no other demographic would have been able to do. And I think that is really our gift that we give to society. In addition to that, looking at the ways in which we embody courage in doing that in the face of adversity. Many of our siblings are working within geopolitical, legal, regressive contexts where being who we are criminalized. It's not recognized. And so working within these particular contexts is quite daunting. And again, we highlight the sheer courageous heart with which we drive the work. And of course, looking at if we are able to get past the fight for survival, that those types of characteristics and skills serve us well in being able to contribute meaningfully as leaders within diverse spheres of society in order to advance.
For sure.
That is so interesting. And I love that you mentioned like the self-expression, because that really comes through in a lot of the queer creators that we have in South Africa in particular. And it's given so many people a platform, so many people a chance to express who they are. And even just seeing that representation, I can only imagine like how that could help people who are not in a space where they feel comfortable enough or safe enough to be themselves. But just seeing that it's, it's a possibility. There are role models there fighting for them, fighting for, just a chance to exist in society with, without being judged, without being labeled. I think that's really great. And, that brings us to our next question, which is, how have things become better in some cases through the work done by the queer community and worse in others?
So I think post 1994, the LGBTIQ plus community has made many strides in achieving civil political rights in South Africa. And then, of course, the battle still continues for socioeconomic liberation, where our the right to be free, the right to be who we are, the right to marry who we want to marry, those rights are inherently limited based on our socioeconomic positioning and the ability for us to be able to embody our freedoms and to love our freedoms. And of course, embody dignity, a sense of equality. The inequalities in South Africa is quite stark between the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So for us, looking at what it means to be a trans woman of color living within a rural context, being able to exercise her right to marry, exercise her right to associate herself with people with similar experiences to herself, the right to live with dignity, the right to feel safe and secure within a community and an environment is limited because of the socioeconomic question, because many people don't have access to viable education opportunities, and therefore being undereducated and not seen as being attractive when entering or attempting to enter the formal labor market. And so in that sense, being formally unemployed in many instances and turning to survival sex work to forge a living. So I think despite the civil political gains we have made, there's still a lot of socioeconomic advancements that we need to make for the community to break through the ceiling, break through the mold in order to embody that level of freedom. I think in context of the law, South Africa has made great strides compared to other counterparts on the continent with the promulgation of the Alteration of Sex Description and Sex Status Act 49 of 2003, in short, Act 49. However, and this is the legal mechanism that we use to change our gender markers with the Department of Home Affairs, but this particular law is still inherently oppressive and limiting for the communities because, again, in order to make use of the law, you need to have access to gender-affirming healthcare, which is currently only being initiated at tertiary health level within urban context, your bigger cities. So again, the geographical divide, the rural-urban divide is quite stark. And of course, the class divide is quite stark in who gets to access that piece of legislation based on, or that right based on where you are located. Secondly, the fact that this particular piece of legislation infuses medical requirements for us to be able to we must first prove using 2 medical reports that we are transgender before we can get recognized as such is a onus that cisgender people don't carry. These are non-trans identifying people don't carry, and that's taken for granted by the system. And so what we are saying is do away with these requirements so that we are able to, on the basis of self-declaration, change our gender particulars with the Department of Home Affairs and not be policed in that sense. We're also advocating for recognition, legal gender recognition for refugees and asylum seekers, children below the age of 18, transgender prisoners, and then, of course, persons with disabilities, that every person, these are individuals that are living on the margins of the margins, should be able to get access to the rights that this country has promised. And those rights are the right to dignity, equality, and freedom.
You guys do such amazing work. And I can only imagine also that the requirements that if I understand it correctly, the requirements that the legislation actually lays out then also costs extra money, which then also highlights the haves and the have nots, because not everyone is going to have extra money for those extra medical reports. So I mean, it like sounds like things are taking a few steps forward, but also a couple of steps back at the same time.
Definitely, Kelly. And I think in addition to that, right, like what we are seeing now with government making strides in doing policy development work around identification management and expanding that to include the needs and realities of trans and gender diverse persons. And they are doing this now under the new identification management system. That's a policy piece that they are trying to get through Parliament, of course. But that particular piece of the new system rests upon a surveillance system whereby biometric data will be captured by diverse of all citizens, all people within the country. And we are also questioning to what extent are we taking a step forward in the context of gender justice, but taking a step backward in the context of human rights, where our right to privacy and confidentiality is being compromised in the process. So it's like, again, you take one step forward and then you have to question, in taking a step forward, are we also taking 2 steps backward at the same time?
Yeah. And I can also imagine that in a country like South Africa, where we have, how do I put this? Where we have groups in our society and cultures and races and tribes that, and also religions that are so old school in their thinking. I think old school is
a very forgiving word.
Yes, a very forgiving word. They are so traditional in their thinking, and I hate the word traditional, but they're just like so old school in their approach and thinking that even when like legislation is passed, there are many people who will still refuse like services to the LGBTQIA plus community and anyone associated with it. As an example, I mean, as like random example, even though people from the queer community are able to marry each other, and a man can marry a man, a woman can marry a woman, etc. There are priests, there are venues, there are suppliers that just refuse to actually like service that community. So as much as we are taking, or as much as the work that you are doing is helping to progress our constitution and our laws and all those things, there are still like so many things that need to be done on like a society level or a societal level to like change like people's mindset and just to give everyone an equal footing everywhere.
No, definitely. And I think that we've seen this play out with Belofte Bos saga, where the owners of the venue objected to or declined to give access to the venue for a lesbian couple, and that matter was dealt with by the South African Human Rights Commission. But when we're looking at it through the lens of the state, right, then in the past, what we have seen is that under the Civil Union Act, which is the same-sex marriage rights being afforded to same-sex couples through this piece of legislation, that in 2019, Parliament took a decision to, of course, repeal a particular part of that legislation. And I stand to be corrected, but I think it's Section 6 that gave marriage officers, there was also state officials, the right to object on the basis of religion, conscience, and belief, to not solemnize these marriages. And what Parliament actually found is that that cannot be used as a ground to discriminate. And so as an official, the marriage officer, you have a public duty to ensure that you carry out the service for everyone, regardless of sexual orientation. I think that was a remarkable step forward to send a powerful message to society and the public that in the spirit of constitutionalism, we cannot be selective in terms of whose rights we are enforcing and whose rights we are not enforcing, because it's a very dangerous precedent that takes us back to an oppressive past of creating divisions between different demographics and at the same time relegating some citizens and some people within our context to second-class citizenship as opposed to full citizenship and entitlements to our constitutional rights. And so I think definitely a long way to go, but the law plays a pivotal role. Parliament plays a pivotal role. The courts play a pivotal role in creating a framework that sets the tone for what we will accept and what we won't accept as a country. At a individual level, at a community level, a lot of work around awareness raising, training, sensitization, education needs to be done by communities, by civil society organizations, and by government departments like the Department of Social Development to ensure that people are being brought into the conversation, being brought into the dialogue to unlearn what they have learned, and of course to learn new ways of knowing and doing to do better in future.
Exactly. And that actually brings me nicely to our last question on our list, but you're welcome to discuss more after this. It's just how can we as a society or as individuals be better allies to the LGBTQIA plus and queer community?
Yeah, I think that it depends on the context. Let me start there. That different contexts would require different responses from people who would define themselves as allies. And as I always say, that we get different types of allies in the sense that you at some point and in some context you would require that ally that can stand in front of you in order to shield against any undue attacks, and particularly in instances where those very attacks, not physical in this particular case, but where those very attacks, incitement to violence, discrimination, and stigma can result in physical violence, to be able to fend that off within particular context, so as not to expose the community member or the person. But then we also have instances where you require that ally to stand next to the person, to accompany the person in certain contexts to more effectively navigate, to occupy space and to take up space for change. But then there are also allies and or contexts that require allies to not stand in front of and block, and not stand next to and influence unnecessarily, but stand behind as support in the sense that an LGBTIQ plus person would know that person is there for reinforcement and support, but that their agency, their autonomy can be foregrounded for us, for them to be able to lead the change that they want to see. Because in many instances, what we have seen is that if allies are not aware of the context, allies can take up a lot of space and take away from the agency and autonomy that LGBTIQ people need to embody in order to maintain and sustain change. And so I think for me, that is how I view allyship. It is a title that is hard earned It is not a title for me that I bestow willy-nilly on people just because somebody had a good thing to say here or there. It is really hard and to some degree, something that can be easily lost because an allyship is very much rooted within deep trust that the community member and the community has in relation to their role that they play in championing human rights advancements. And of course, very much rooted in respect for the community and the work that we do. Many instances when I look at how the basics of being the basics of starting the journey of becoming an ally and a good ally would be through a transgender lens, just to ask somebody, what is your real name? And not the name that you are using, that the state has given, or that your parents have given to you, and that has been recorded on your identification document. What do you want to be known as? What's the name that you use for yourself? And respecting that and using that name. Secondly, using the correct pronouns and asking the person, what pronouns do you use? And then thirdly, of course, steering away from misgendering and dead naming people wholesale in that instance. And so dead naming basically is when you're using the name that a person was assigned rather than the name that they are affirming for themselves. So those are just the basics, right? And how you can do that is not, and you need to do that in a way that is sensitive to the person in the context. So an ally can really not want to ask somebody in public to out themselves. Listen, how do you identify? Listen, what is your preferred pronoun? There are other ways in which one can do that. That can perhaps that will perhaps not lead to a person having to out themselves in unsafe environments. So I think for me, allyship is hard earned, and then that would be the basics of just understanding how to show up as an ally depending on the context and how to gender and of course name a person based on their right to gender self-determination.
Absolutely. And I think you raised such a good point about allies taking up space that should be given to people who, like trans people who need to have, their voices heard, because I saw it. I'm not just going to identify an issue that I don't know if it was an issue, but I saw a local influencer / celebrity who got involved in a culture, and they then got such recognition for being involved in something where I just felt like it took away from, providing a platform to the queer people who need to speak about, their identity, how they express themselves. Now it's become something that someone does, for fun, whereas you should holding space for people to elevate their voices, because what is the point of saying you're an ally if all you're doing is saying you're an ally? What you need to do is listen to what people are saying, listen to what's needed of you, and then do that. If you can donate, if it's a case of donating money, you donate money. If you have a huge platform as a celebrity, an influencer, a news broadcasting thing, anything, you give that space to the queer person and you allow them to share their truth. It's not about you featuring the queer person to make yourself look like an ally, Like you said, it's something that's hard earned. You don't just willy-nilly call yourself an ally or be called one.
Yeah. Like I feel like a lot of people do it for clout, and they only do it like at certain times. They'll only do it like around like Pride Month, or they'll only do it like when there's a controversial issue to be discussed.
Exactly. What are you saying at your family braai when people are being homophobic or transphobic? What are you saying in your group chat on WhatsApp, girlfriends? In your office as you guys are talking, what are you doing there?
And also, like, what are you doing where people can't see you? Like, are you like donating to like worthy causes and not putting it on social media, for example?
Absolutely.
No, definitely. You're hitting the nail on the head there in terms of how people exploit struggle, how certain people exploit struggle in order to advance themselves and not the community. And we need to be vigilant for that. Of course, we cannot always concretely say that is the intent, but once we see that this is more about the person than it is about the change and the community, then I think that those become clear indicators that of the limitations of what they're trying to do with the community. And again, being a supporter is one thing, being an ally is a completely different thing altogether, because an ally goes over and beyond what is expected to get the work done, to get the social justice work done. And where a supporter would show up whenever they feel like it, whenever.
Convenient, yeah.
Yeah, it's not something that they proactively drive. It is something that is a possibility, changes the possibility when they are around. Where with allies, this is somebody that's going to be proactively engaged in the process of change making.
Mm.
Absolutely. And just a question from my side, we didn't speak too much about gender dynamics earlier on in the chat, but for people who don't know much about, what Gender Dynamics does, where can we go besides your website to find out more about what you do? How can we engage? How can we support? How can we amplify what you're doing?
So you can definitely go onto our social media pages. Amber, for Facebook, it is Gender Dynamics, Gender Dynamics with an X at the end, not a CS. And then we have an Instagram account. We are also on Twitter. And for all of these, the typical handle or the profile name is Gender Dynamics. We're also on LinkedIn. We've got an account there as well, if you wanted to connect with us via that platform.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. We will be sure to share that out on our channel.
Excellent. Thank you for having me, Kelly and Amber.
Thank you so much. Are there any other parting thoughts you'd like to share before we wrap up? Any other advice or any other queer activists or organizations you think we should be following?
Oh, so many. I will not be able to do it justice. First, let me just say thank you for creating this platform for dialogue and discussions. We definitely need more of this within our country and, of course, on our continent and more broadly globally, in order to keep the conversations around respect for difference and diversity alive. In terms of specific organizations that is doing remarkable work, and I'm going to be leaving out so many, in the Western Cape and Northern Cape Triangle Project, there is SWEAT, there is PASOP that specifically deals with refugees and asylum seekers and persons in forced displacement. We have Matimba that works with transgender youth and children. We've got the Gale in the Northern Cape, Iranti.org that does amazing media advocacy work. They're based in Gauteng. We've got She in the Eastern Cape that's based in East London that does amazing work at community level as well in terms of providing healthcare, gender-affirming healthcare services to the community and also doing policy advocacy. So many organizations that's doing incredible work that I think in future, hopefully you can get on your platform as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And we'll definitely share that on our social media channels and online and, just make it easily accessible to everyone and anyone, wanting to be better allies and supporters.
For sure.
Excellent.
And you can find those channels on Instagram and Facebook at Brown Girls Guide Pod and on Twitter at BGG Pod. Or anyone can just email us and ask us for all the info on info@browngirlsguide.co.za.
For sure. So thank you so much for joining us today, Liberty. This was a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for educating us. And we really hope that the people listening have learned from this conversation as much as we have. So thank you so much.
Thank you, you too. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you very much. And this is where we will end things off for today. So on that note, and until next time, this is where we say goodbye.
Bye.
So cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.